Chapter 2. Standing. Scotty stumbles to the shore, dragging her emaciated form and the cold steel of her only companion onto the land with her. The heavy sword thunks down into the soft sand beside her, releasing a spray of particulates that gently splash into the water that washes up around her ankles. Scotty crumples to her knees. Her arms fall limp to her sides. Her head sags as she teeters on the edge of unconsciousness. Fatigue and disappointment rack her body. With fury being her only driving force, she begins to surrender to exhaustion. Her head slumps forward, long ocean-soaked hair matted against her form. Her legs shudder and collapse, planting soaked haunches into the shore as she crushes her slack hands into fists against the sand. She wiggles her numb fingers into the damp soil, sifting the coarse grains against her palms to try and feel anything. "I am so tired," she moans. She begins to lean to one side, her sea foam white hair slowly falling in matted clumps over her shoulders. Sweat and seawater trickle off her body, washing lines of resentment through the sand. "I work so hard." Her shoulders droop, and if her teacher had seen her in such a defenseless state, he would have scolded her for ineptitude. "You must remain ready at all times," his voice would boom, like gravel forced down her ears. "You must never show weakness or allow yourself to be caught unprepared." But Scotty simply didn't care. Enough was enough. "It's never enough," she hisses through cracked lips. "No matter what I do, how much I accomplish, there's always more." Her voice begins to crack, and she takes several shaky breaths. "There's always something I need to do. Someone else's mess to clean up." Her shoulders begin to shake gently. "But what about what I want to do? What I need?" She slowly cranes her head up and gazes out across the water, attempting to peer beyond the horizon to the only person who ever loved her. "I miss you so much." She closes her eyes, allowing herself one moment of respite before glancing back down at the waves. She reaches out a shaky hand to touch the water, and almost in cruel irony, the water recedes, as if in response, before a wave laps up on the shore farther down, just out of her reach. Water begins to well up around her eyes. It was too much to bear, and she could feel herself slipping away. "You lose someone too?" Scotty chokes back her tears, scrambling to her knees before clumsily retrieving her sword and wheeling around. She raises the massive weapon and nearly decapitates the nearby figure, if not for her muscles being fatigued and one of her feet falling partially asleep. She raises a dirty hand to claw at her face, tearing away her weak appearance and tears with strings of tangled hair. Before her stands a young man who, in turn, had no appearance on his face that dictated that he was in any way alarmed that a greatsword was pressed against his neck. Instead, he simply looked on, past the deadly sharp introduction, through the veil of power and mask she wore, to the soft, hurting person underneath. It was not a look of pity or concern, but of genuine intrigue and earnestness. Scotty faltered. She was unaccustomed to individuals remaining unperturbed in her presence and the wielding of her weapon. More so, by the fact that he seemed less concerned by her rough exterior and seemed to peer into who she truly was and smiled. "Who are you?" she growls in a half-attempted threat that was caught with her need to clear her throat. She composes herself, strengthening her stance before speaking again. "What business do you have with me?" The boy doesn't react, only blinking slowly as if assuring he was still cognizant, but not in any rush. "I lost someone too," he says softly, brushing past her cold remarks as he turns and faces the water. "The sea can be a terribly cold and cruel place." Scotty grits her teeth and presses her blade deeper against his neck. "You know not what you speak of," she sputters between clenched teeth. He turns back to look at her, his eyes glassy, and her bloodlust suddenly dwindles. "Don't I?" he asks. asks, almost choking on the words. The two share a long moment as a chilling ocean breeze blows between them, and Scotty shivers uncharacteristically, perhaps in preparation for his next words. "You're beautiful." The words seem to surprise himself more than Scotty, as they both attempt to maintain their composure. He turns away suddenly, raising a finger to his lips, and she finally drops the sword. "What do you want?" Scotty whispers. Such simple and innocent words somehow opened a wellspring of vast answers that neither of them realized would be so personal, or lead to deeper conversation. He looks back at her and smiles awkwardly as he shifts his weight. He says, jerking his head slightly. "I don't know. Peace? Justice?" He looks down, as if the sand might have the answers notated for him. He suddenly turns and looks at her in a way that resembles him being surprised by her presence, as if their roles were reversed and he was the one lost in thought before realizing she was there. "To help," he simply says finally. The stupidity and naivety of what he had said and the utter carelessness of how he said it caused Scotty to tremble. A tremor courses through her as she was shaken to her core by what he said, and the waterworks began to act up again. "Such foolishness," she mutters, turning away from him, hoping her hair would be enough to hide her face. Scotty gathers up her sword before marching away. She slowed her escape to inspect her sword. She knew that nothing in the mortal plane could damage it, but it was always good to look over a blade before sheathing it. The main reason she busied herself with this task was that it was one of the few things that brought her peace. It allowed her a moment to take a break and admire a beautiful weapon. Apparently, it had been made by her mother from the pieces of the cage that once held her father. Not that she had freed him, but a piece of his past was repurposed into something useful again. The purple light of the morning shone against the glossy blade. Its dark steel had a deep silver hue with hints of green like seaweeds floating in the distant water. There were pockmarks like imperfections in stone, but otherwise it showed no signs of damage. Sliding it into the hard leather scabbard, Scotty takes a moment to collect herself and absorb everything that's happened. Slowly but surely, she managed to gather herself. She had a duty to do. There was always work to do. She wondered if this was going to be her life until the end of time, if she lasted that long. A part of her hoped against hope that this would end. Perhaps if she worked hard enough, after enough people were saved, that she might be able to take a break. She needed rest. She trudged through the cold sand as she made her way along the coastline. The waters were sharp and bit at her feet with a stinging cold. To anyone else, this would have been a beautiful morning with an extravagant vista, but Scotty was too exhausted to care. She was too fed up with the world to enjoy its beauty, too tired to stop and watch. She just wanted to be done. After several hours of trudging herself across the shore without any signs of civilization, Scotty started to lose what last bits of hope that remained. In a fog, she stumbled across something in the sand. Without as much of a glance, Scotty dragged her feet across the obstacle, only to realize she was no longer standing on sand. Scotty's eyes fluttered, and in the light of the sunrise, she could see vague, dark shapes of scattered wood. Embedded in the surf around her was the wreckage of a ship. Without much left in her system, Scotty managed to crawl inside a large section of the hull before collapsing completely. Sleep took hold of her like a massive maw, and she allowed herself to be dragged down into the dark depths of slumber. "Are you all right?" Scotty's eyes fluttered open. She was sore from head to toe, but managed to push off the shroud of unconsciousness. She slowly turns towards the voice that called out to her. It was that same boy from earlier, the one who called her beautiful. A warm sense of frustration welled up inside her, fueling her efforts to stand. Rage was the only thing that revitalized her. "What do you want now?" she calls back, her voice croaking in pain. She struggles to rise, her limbs still partly asleep, and groaning in protest upon waking. He was crouched upon a bluff of sand several feet off, peering down into the shattered hull of the ship she was laying in. "Did you have a nice rest with the fishes?" he asked with a soft smirk. Scotty simply glowered at him. Why do you persist in pestering me? She growls. Just checking in on you. And who asked you? Nobody. I just wanted to. His voice was calm, his stare soft and unwavering. It was as if his intentions were pure, but who can genuinely care for another person? Especially if that person wasn't even family, if that person was a stranger, or worse, if that person was her. Scotty bared her teeth. There was no way anyone would ever care for her. This was surely a trick. Away from me, she barks at him. The sudden anger startled the boy, causing him to stumble back from his position. He could not understand her frustration, her rage. This infuriated Scotty even more. Not only was he meddling in affairs that weren't his responsibility, but he was performing it of his own free will. She stumbles along the lower deck, making her way out into the sunlight through a jagged crack in the hull. He was there to meet her. At least the Dauntless is still of some use, he muses. She was tired of his riddles. Speak plainly, she orders. She struggles to raise her sword. He turns to look at her, and she tries to hide her weakness by taking a step forward to support the weight of her blade. I think my dad would hate to see a ship like this, he says softly. Scotty blinks, coming to the realization. The tip of the blade drops into the sand as she turns her head towards the shattered wood. Your father, Scotty struggles to say. Her head still ached, and the words couldn't come. She cursed herself for appearing so weak, unable to even perform a single sentence. Don't worry, he offers. Scotty turns to his reassuring words. They're dead. It took her several moments to process this information. It was as if everything he said touched her soul, but it was merely her being vulnerable. Her guard was down. She was hearing what she wanted to hear, making up things. She started to say. Was she really about to apologize to this mortal? She clamped her teeth down, barring her tongue from reaching out to this insignificant boy. It's funny, he says, placing a hand against the aged wood. I guess this place is more than one kind of resting place now. His smile was brilliant, beautiful. His hair glowed in the sun behind him. How could this person make such a joke, to bring such positivity from such a tragic place? Scotty scowled at this. He was clearly a simpleton. She had defaced the resting place of his family, but it was their fault for invading the sea. It was only fair for her to take refuge in it in return. This boy, on the other hand, was making light of his deceased family. He had no respect. Without another word, Scotty turned and walked away. Hey, the boy called after. Do you know where you're going? Scotty did not respond. She struggled to march away, dragging the sword through the sand behind her. If you need a guide, I can... Leave me be, she orders. I have much work to do. A massive cove spread out across the shore, covered with piers and pylons and various other intricate and ramshackle structures. A veritable city strung together with slimy boards and fraying rope stretched out across the water, connecting the various islands back to the mainland. This wharf was made of driftwood, petrified from countless ages, nailed beside fresh timber milled from the local forest nearby, and everything in between. Everything that used to be a ship made its rest here, as part of the structure of this village. There are large sections of repurposed boats that sit smashed against rocks or dismantled along the piers. Rigging has turned into lashing to hold these rickety buildings together, as masts lean against each other, creating tents with their sails. It was communities like these that were terrifyingly fascinating, the kind that worried Scotty, that she realized was beyond saving. There was too much work to be done here. She could not save them all by herself, and yet she would not be allowed to leave until her work was done. Scotty began to search along the shore. She gathered the attention of sailors and fishermen making their way out to the ocean in the early morning. The sight of a beautiful girl who looked like she came from the sea did more than rouse their interest. Some asked if she was a herald of the waters or bore any news of the tide. After an arduous investigation with various annoying conversations, she moved on from the shore. She didn't know how long she had spent wasting her time asking about rumors of sea monsters to slay. It was wishful thinking that her duty would be so simple. She dreaded performing any task away from the water, but she began to move inland. Most people ignored her questions, only resulting in her increased displeasure. They were more interested in asking where her parents were, or asking why she was dressed in such a shoddy fashion. Certain establishments even barred her from entry, fearing her to be a homeless scavenger or an insane gypsy. Their questions were intolerable, and prude behavior disgusting. She was getting nowhere. As she climbed from the shore to the mountainside, she could see a distinct change in architecture. Buildings were built into the side of cliffs, and roads laid out upon the natural curvature of the landscape. These people hadn't mastered the elements or tailored the terrain in any way, instead choosing to try and fit their unruly living conditions into the wild landscape. Scotty couldn't imagine how anyone would choose this sort of life. The wind blew through the jagged cracks at the base of this mountain, nearly toppling furniture in the street or kidnapping children as it ran rampant through the streets. Birds nestled in crevices, and water trickled down stone walls, allowing moss to grow along every surface. They had taken no precautions building their city in this mountainside. These people were lawless, yet everywhere she looked, there was no one in need for divine intervention. Had she not been in such a foul mood, she might have been able to see the beauty in this place. Where nature retook old stone, she only saw negligence and maintenance. Where the earth was subdued by talented mason workers, she only saw destructive terraforming. Perhaps if she had grown up here, or had a chance to grow up anywhere, she could have learned to love a place as vibrant as this. Despite the rustic splendor of this quaint empire, her sour mood persisted. She was only here to complete a job before moving on to the next. Nothing more. No time to enjoy life and the world around her. She began to wander aimlessly amongst the city until she came upon a small crowd. Along the cliff edge there was a cobblestone courtyard with an immaculate view of the city on the water below. At the center was a destroyed water fountain that still managed to spray water from various parts of the broken statues. What drew Scotty's attention was not the stifled murmurs of the crowd nor the shattered architecture, but a figure that also enraptured everyone else around. A single figure danced around the mangled statue, playing an instrument Scotty didn't recognize. The way they plucked the strings felt wrong, like they were mistreating the instrument, yet it created such an enchanting sound. The way they danced around the center of the pavilion looked erratic and unpracticed, until Scotty saw the true meaning behind their movements. The way the artist moved seemed to be in time to the rhythm of the streams, the random spurts and splashes of water creating a tempo that would have gone unnoticed if not for his accompaniment. Scotty wasn't sure what was more impressive, the idea that they were able to control the water and command it to their movements, or that they could move and play in time with the natural order of things. Either way, their focus was split and their playing never faltered. It was more than just beautiful. The flow and passion. It displayed something more than a simple feeling, more than sight or sound. This wasn't just an enjoyable moment of a correct sequence of notes. It went beyond what a proper performance was and became an example of what could be, what should be. This wasn't just an example of good music. This was music. This was art. This is what music was all about. It's about sharing a story, a feeling, a moment, and sharing that with others in a way that nothing else can. Music is a language understood by all, no matter who and where they are. And in that moment, all eyes were drawn, and by the time the last note was played, Scotty was simply numb. Fingers applauded around her, fists raised in agreement, mouths open in complimentary cheer, hands slapped together. But Scotty could hear none of it. She was stuck, the sound of silence filling her ears at the lack of the joyous tone. The music had stopped. Even though time continued on, the moment had ended. She was more than dumbstruck. She had lost something she didn't know she had until it was gone. He smiles at her. "Are you finished with your work?" he asks. At first this question confused Scotty. What could such a question possibly mean? Do you know about her mission and how? Then her confusion turned to frustration as she realized who this was. Her stunned, wide eyes blinked in confusion before narrowing in disapproval. Now that he was finished dancing around, Scotty recognized him from the boy she had met at the beach this morning. "Hardly," Scotty scoffs. He tilts his head in confusion. "It seems as though your paradise here is completely free of any problems." "I wouldn't call this paradise," he says. Scotty glances at him as he rests his instrument on his shoulder. He was once again looking off into the distance as she talked to him, something else that bothered her. "No place is perfect. We've all got our own share of problems. Paradise is what you make it." He turns to her with a smile. Scotty shakes her head. "I have no idea what you mean," she hisses. He twists his lips and touches his chin. "If you're looking for paradise, you won't find it," he explains. "It's not until you find something worth fixing that you can make it into what you want. If you're constantly going out into the world with preconceived ideas, you'll always be disappointed by what you find." "You're speaking nonsense," Scotty mutters. She turns away from him, tired of listening to his ramblings. "Maybe so," he says softly, "but I'm living in paradise." Scotty turns to see him walking off with his instrument in hands, starting to pluck at the strings again. "You lied!" Scotty screams. The ocean winds snatch away her voice as it travels across the waters. She stamps her feet into the surf, splashing up sand as water washes away her tantrum. Scotty waited for a response, but the spray of the ocean wind carried no message. "There isn't anything to do here." The surf curls away from her, returning to the ocean without accepting her words. "You banished me to this place to punish me." Her toes dig into the wet sand. "Admit it!" Scotty takes several labored breaths as she struggles to contain her fury. Her throat was starting to hurt after only yelling a little bit. Scotty had never figured out what the procedure was for contacting any deities, including her own father. They always reached out to her, either when they needed something or she had made another mess. She contemplated yelling again, but the unbridled use of her voice had already wounded her throat, and she considered against the painful action. Finally, she decided to march into the ocean. If her father wasn't going to show up, then there was nobody to stop her. She plunges into the water, forcing herself downward into the depths. She may not know what magic her father used to transport her across planes of existence, but she wasn't going to sit here and wait for divine intervention. She may never be able to leave this reality without him, but any place was better than here. This place was beautiful, warm, inviting, and yet she could not feel at peace here. The serenity of this place did not belong to her. She could certainly not partake in the natural healing this place had to offer, not until she was done being used. Only when her work was completed could she allow herself to rest. Her descent was fueled by rage, angst, and frustration. It was unbearable to be so close to such a magnificent life and not be able to be a part of it. Arm over arm, she forced the water beneath her grasp, forcing the water behind her as she swam away from the cursed shore. She forced the waves under her reach, as if pushing the entire world away behind her as she ventured out into the sea. The cerulean water rose up to curve into waves that crashed down around her. Scotty dove beneath the waves, gliding under the water's surface. The waves continued to crash down, beating the water around her, forcing her to swim deeper. The farther she got, the more difficult it became for her to move through the ocean current. The sea struggled to respond to her influence. The water became darker and more violent. She began to be buffeted more and more by the water around her, as if the sea itself had grown violent. She began to panic. These were not the waters she had known. She had grown up in a sea full of life and love, but this ocean was nearly unrecognizable. The peace and serenity had been replaced with erratic chaos. The power and massiveness of such a beloved part of her past had turned into a dark and terrifying presence that no longer recognized her and sought simply to crush and drown her. She wanted to cry, but the salt water held her tears at bay. She wanted to mourn the loss of her last comfort in the world, but fear struck her heart. The riptide tossed her asunder, the undertow unwilling to allow her to escape to the surface. She thrashed in the water, clawing at something, anything, to save her. The water surged as another wave rolled in, but this momentary release of pulling force was only to slam her back down again into the depths below. Scotty shuddered and shaked. Her breath was waning, and she could already feel herself slipping on the edge of unconsciousness. Part of her wanted to give up, to simply let her death be her final act of spite, but her will was strong. Her anger against this unbehaved water outweighed her fear, but she did not know for how long. The water carried her down and down, further into the dark waters that she could not control. Something was not right, but there was nothing she could do. Suddenly, she was at the bottom. She could feel the sand in between her toes as she touched down into the ocean floor. She glanced up. At least she hoped it was up. It was so dark she could not see the sun nor the sky above. The silt that parted beneath her feet was enough to give her the strength she needed. Planting her feet firmly into the sand, she allowed herself to sink lower, tensing her whole body for this final act. The waters grew a little darker. There was something moving around her, preparing to strike, to grasp her and hold her down until her last breath faded. But she waited. With her full body crouched, like a child curled up in need of protection, she sprang forward. Kicking off the bottom, she rushed through the ocean waters before bursting through the surface. Water splashed her face as she struggled to regain her composure. She could breathe again, but that wasn't what had gripped her so tightly. She had only been under the water for a few minutes, and yet it felt like her strength had been choking her. She paddled to shore, collapsing in a heap as her body shivered with fatigue. She lay there, sand clinging to her features as she struggles to remember how to feel alive. She blinks away silt, coughing up grime as algae filters through her teeth. She blows away sea foam from her nostrils and struggles to regain a steady heartbeat. She lay there for who knows how long. The sun faded as the moon came and went. The warm wind on her back in the dark of night caused her muscles to spasm, remembering how to move. Her leg convulses, lashing out and kicking something rough that recoils. Scotty rolls over to look at what she struck, only for another panic attack to set in. Fear gripped her soul as she gazed upon the massive silhouette. Without the sun and the moon, the only way to see shapes was to find the parts of the sky that didn't have stars. This creature nearly blotted out her entire vision. Even in the dark, she could tell that he was not happy. "Out of the countless centuries I've existed," a rumbling voice calls, "I have never been greeted by getting kicked." It would have been funny, but it was not funny. Scotty didn't know how to feel. Should she feel ashamed for trying to escape, for failing? Should she be angry at her father for abandoning her here, or for the countless things he hasn't told her? "Except for the first time that I met you," Scotty blinked. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Her father audibly smiles, but otherwise is indistinguishable from the darkness around. "When your mother was pregnant with you," he explains, "I pressed my cheek against her stomach, only to suffer a terrible strike from a young warrior." Scotty didn't know what to make of this. Was he making light of her birth? Was he saying she was always meant to be a weapon, or that she was always a pain for him to endure, even before she fully existed in this world? There was only one thing she could wrap her mind around. "Where's Mom?" Scotty asks out loud. She was still struggling to breathe, let alone speak clearly. She was unsure if she was even heard, as her father took a long time to respond. She tried to collect her thoughts, to get everything back inside and learn how to control her body again. "I don't know." His words were soft yet firm. It was this simpleness that frightened Scotty more than any monster or near-death experience she had faced. Her father, an omnipotent, omnipresent being, was unsure. A being that sees and knows all didn't know something. "How is that possible?" Scotty asks. She could feel saliva spilling from her lips, trying to wash the sand from her mouth, causing her to splutter. "That's what we're trying to figure out," he says nonchalantly. Scotty looks up in the darkness, frozen with an arm wiping her mouth. "Who's we?" The moment hung in the air. Nobody moved or breathed. It was as if this infinitesimal creature felt small. Scotty's arms fell to her side. The fact that her father would hesitate communicated so much more than what he could say. She could feel this becoming a pivotal moment that she would remember for the rest of her life, even before anything happened. She clenches and unclenches her fists. "Your sister," he says simply. Scotty is thrown back into the moment. Had she imagined the minutes that passed while she awaited his answer, or had he taken such a long pause to muster the courage to say something so powerful? Scotty didn't know how to feel. He had stated it so plainly, as if it was common knowledge. "My," Scotty whispers. She couldn't manage to say the word. For the longest time, she had been without family. The fact that she wasn't alone felt so wonderful, but was betrayed by the fact that she never knew. "Your sister," he says again. She could hear his words, but they didn't make any sense. None of this would sink in. She had felt so empty, and yet she was unable to accept this into her life. "This is the world she grew up in." "What do you mean?" Scotty pleads. "We let her grow up in this world," her father explains, "among normal people and have a normal life." Scotty's blood began to boil. None of this made any sense. Why was her sister kept a secret? Was it kept a secret just from Scotty, or was it from everyone? And which was worse? "So why am I here?" Scotty hisses between clenched teeth. "A precaution," he says simply. "Many worlds are under attack, and I wanted you to be here." "Why?" Scotty asks again. The question was more of a threat. The sea beast hesitates. "I thought you would like it here," he says finally. "I wanted you to see the place where your sister grew up." Scotty's fists tightened into balls. "Why?" Scotty screams. "So I could see the beautiful life my sister has, but I never got to have?" She could feel the tears welling up, but the salt that stung her face wouldn't let the stream spill forth. Her father's silhouette looked down at her in the dark, his face unable to be read. Scotty didn't know what to make of any of this. This was a new type of psychological punishment that she was incapable of handling. "You will wait here," he directs, "until the time is right." Scotty's shoulders shook. Every muscle in her body was tight. She could feel herself struggling to breathe. Her ears were ringing and her eyes were blurry, but she could sense her father sinking back into the ocean. His low, guttural tone was warning her about being ready, but she didn't know what for. She managed to shake herself as a gentle wave washed against her feet, from her father submerging beneath the water. "Enjoy your time here," was the last thing she heard from her father.